Hi, I'm Simon Isaacs, and this is our Anything in Print podcast.
Actually, I started in the industry back in 1984 as a YTS trainee for a local company here in Norwich called Fit Signs. Little plug for them. It was a really interesting journey, and again, it's not dissimilar to how other people got into the industry. You kind of stumble into the industry, and we might touch on that a little bit later. But it was through somebody I knew. We included the people who were exhibiting in the panels. I think I probably got more of an overview of how they felt things actually were. Because the show itself was smaller than I expected it to be, and that was the comment that I got back. I think flipping that around, because it's smaller, I think that it was more opportunity to spend time and talk with the suppliers about why they were there, what they were doing, the things they were seeing that were happening. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting, there seemed to be, yes, there was a drive again for things that save time. There seemed to be a focus on, let's create things that kind of link. So the application tables to save time, registration points for actually things that were cut. Now they've been around for a long time, but there seemed to be the ability for machines to work together.
Hi, my name's Tim Carter, and I'd like to welcome you to the 6th episode of which is now Series 2 of our Anything in Print podcast. We really hope you're enjoying the series as we host industry's most inspiring leaders, discuss hottest topics in print, as well as key verticals to be involved in this year. And today we welcome Craig Brown, CEO of the International Sign Association UK, who has over 25 years industry experience, has run his own signage business and now leads the ISA. So thanks for joining me, Craig.
No problem at all, Tim.
I mentioned that we do like to discuss key verticals and opportunities here on the podcast. And in my view, sign and digital marketing, the sign and digital market is really one of these areas that are exciting and offers opportunities for growth. And as it happens, and coincidentally, the Sign and Digital Show was concluded last week. And I know ISA and yourself, Craig, took part in some of the featured sessions like the Sign Surgery. And I'd like to do a little recap on the show and also your personal view on how it went. But before we do that and we dive deeper into Sign and Digital, I'd like to start with you, Craig, and understand a little bit about yourself, the work that you do today and your background and some of the experiences that you've gained along the way.
Yeah, certainly. Again, a little potted history. I'm afraid it's even slightly longer than 25 years. I started in the industry back in 1984 as a YTS trainee for a local company here in Norwich called Fit Signs. Little plug for them. It was a really interesting journey, and again, it's not dissimilar to how other people got into the industry. You kind of stumble into the industry, and we might touch on that a little bit later. But it was through somebody I knew there was an apprenticeship place available, and I went for an interview, was successful, and the business itself was a reasonable size, I would say a regional concern rather than a national concern, 50 odd members of staff. There was an opportunity to work in each department, and working in those departments allowed you to get an overview of the sign industry. So neon blowing, there was actually paint, some fabrication, acrylic work, sign writing. And there was also an opportunity to work in the office, so you were responsible for sourcing product. And over the 2 years of the YTS ran, they liked to put you in a department for a month at a time before they made that decision where you'd actually go. After about 6 months, it was decided that I'd be in the signwriting department, which for me was exactly where I wanted to be in the first place, that creative side, the opportunity to use, I would say, that my skill set at the time. But it was also just at the advent of the vinyl cutter. So that, there was that sea change where labour-saving devices were starting to come in, and maybe some of the hard-earned, craft set was starting to change. And rather than rain against it, I think I tried to embrace and could the two skill sets run side by side. And I'd like to think I've taken that view right the way through my career, if that makes sense. So that was how I came into the industry. So 39 years ago.
You don't look old enough, Craig.
Well, I obviously had a very light paper round. That's what my mother said. So no Sunday supplements to carry around. But it was just opportunities seemed to open up. I migrated from Fit Science to really small independent. I learned to sign like lorry curtains, but then we did a lot of templating. So we were using various materials to allow, shall we say, stenciling products. And because we were then starting to use products that were used for the vehicle industry right the way across the UK and into Europe, I started to actually see a little bit that outside my small sphere, or outside Norfolk, and put it that way. So traveling around the UK, meeting other people, meeting other suppliers. And I had the opportunity to be the first employee of the franchise Signs Express. Now, again, you're talking late 89, no real internet at that time. So the research you could do was your library. So my understanding of what a franchise was very limited, and without pushing brands, probably McDonald's and someone like a Drain Doctor or Dynarod were the franchises of the time. But I liked the idea of the concept of taking on machinery. At that stage was very early into digital print. I mean, we're talking very small ability to print. Things like the Gerber Edge were just starting to come along. So again, foils onto vinyl. And I just like the fact that this business was looking at how they could actually service the customer. And that might sound a little bit strange, because as an industry, I think because we are so creative by our nature, I think sometimes we forget the customer is the customer. And maybe the service element wasn't as high as it needed to be in the late 80s. And I think that was why the franchises were so successful. They brought in the concept of the customer comes first. And I will say that's not always right. I think we've all experienced that. But it was a case of make the journey for the customer far more pleasurable. You know, someone comes in and they're told it's, 3-4 weeks before we can make a site visit, another 3-4 weeks before we can get a quote, and then maybe another 3 or 4 weeks before the job's done. 3 months have slipped past and somebody's waiting to open a business. That's not acceptable. But I think the way things have actually developed, people's expectations now are probably too short. So it's always trying to get that balance. So for me, the stepping stone was actually run the original pilot scheme here in Norwich, proved the concept actually worked. And then it was the launch of the franchises in 92. So it was a 2.5-3 year probation period, if you like, to prove the concept worked. And as the role changed, they needed someone to train the franchisees with the skill set, because they were coming in as business owners and then should we say, employing people like myself who had experience in the sign trade. So they were the sales force, the owners were the sales force. People like me were behind the scenes using their knowledge to create and dress products. I always use that analogy. We buy substrate in, we dress it, whether it be with vinyl, digital prints, whether it be with built up letters. And it was great, because every time an opportunity came up, rather than worrying whether I could do it, I just said yes, and then used my network of connections within the sign industry. And that is the great thing. The supply chain within the industry, it has always been happy to share. I don't necessarily think they always share the right stuff, but I think there is the ability there for people to learn on the job and actually take the business forward. So that was something that kind of opened up for me and actually has allowed me to be where I am now. But from that point,
can I just interrupt you there? I just want to maybe explore a little bit more in terms of some of the things that you've said, because I think they really are quite important. So you talked about your experience of being service led and taking customers on a journey. Yeah. So how did the technology at that time help you to do that better than maybe the legacy analog techniques that were available at that time?
Well, I suspect some of it was because when I stepped into, again, the Fit Signs drawing office. So if somebody wanted a visual created to what their shop front, it was a technical drawing. So there was a huge investment of time, skill, and the likes to actually to make that drawing happen. So you had to make the judgment call at the outset. Was this customer's spend going to be worth it for the time that you put in to create the visual. With the advent of the, should we say, things like CorelDRAW and some of the software packages that came along, and again, Graphics Advantage, the software that came along with that, allowed you to do vectored shapes and outlines. So you could do a very basic visual of what the sign would look like. Vehicle profiles allowed you to lay up a vehicle to show someone what it looked like. And it was something you could create within maybe 15, 20 minutes, rather than someone spending 3 or 4 hours. So, shall we say that the technology allowed the service to become better. And I suppose probably the industry before was the photographic industry. You'd send a film away for, a week was a quick turnaround, 3 weeks was a slow turnaround. So now actually I can have my prints within an hour, and now we don't have prints at all. That is digital on the phone. So technology has aided us in that.
Okay, no, interesting. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. So yeah, just sort of moving on then from that first stage of your experience, how did that progress?
Well, obviously, as the business actually grew, I was kind of watching franchisees develop businesses, and I was helping them structure their businesses. So I actually looked to take on a business myself. And it might sound a bit strange. You've got all of the skill set. Why would you take a franchise on? Well, my view was actually these guys would help me with the bits that I was weak at. So maybe the accounting side of the business, maybe the actual, strange enough, the sales side of the business, where you might need to support all the digital marketing, which was then starting to come to the fore. Because before that, we had yellow pages, so you just had the bigger ad and you tried to get to the front of the directory rather than lost at the back of the directory. So I view that this structure was actually just like employing a member of staff to do the bits that I wasn't very good at. So the license fee paid for that service, and probably was less than a salary would be. But it just never opened up the opportunity. A young family, a mortgage. I just didn't have the cash to allow me to do the next stepping stone. But I was fortunate. The two gentlemen who set the business up, David Corbett and Frank Eliel, recognised my frustration. And rather than them risk losing me, they made me a director of the business in 2000. So I had the opportunity to become part of so it wasn't my business, but I then was allowed to become almost like a custodian of the brand. That's probably the best explanation I can have. And at exactly that time, this sign association, which at that time was called the BSA, were taking a look at us. And who are these new guys on the block? We've been around a decade, but it was kind of, they're making a bit of noise. We probably need to keep an eye on them. And again, I don't mean that to sound skeptical, but we were very different from the traditional, the Pierce, the Mersons, who were very construction led. They were fabricating a lot, where we were working with supply businesses to supply the product for us to dress. So rather than, should we say, keeping us at an arm's length, they invited us into the tent. And I don't know whether that was to keep an eye on us, just to check that we weren't doing anything wrong. But it made it quite clear quite early on that they were focused on fabrication and standards. They didn't really know very much about vinyl, and that was the way the industry seemed to be going. So I was asked to then step onto the technical committee to give them some guidance on, funny enough, sign writing, on things like vinyl applications, the monomeric, polymeric cast films, as they were at the time. And I just used my connections within the sector. So we'd then go and talk to 3M. You've already done all the research. You've done in effect, the documentation to verify that these products will last and be warranted. Would you be prepared to share that data with us? So there's where some of the guidelines started to come from. The guidelines were being created by the people who were manufacturing the product. To me, that just seemed a natural way to go. Maybe that wasn't the view before we joined the association. So that was how we ended up coming into that product. But then the two gentlemen who set the business up recognised that they'd like to step away from the business completely. So they gave me the opportunity to make a formal buy into the business. And over a 15-year period, we had a buy-in, a buyout. I then brought my previous business partners out who'd helped me fund the original buy-in, and then I set my management team to buy me out in 2018. So the nice thing is that journey has allowed me to experience the stresses of owning a business, the actual and probably maybe have empathy with other business owners who are trade associate members. So some of the problems that they might be going through, I'm now finding I'm becoming a mentor, a sounding board. maybe it's something, a different skill set that the association didn't have before. And I'm not saying that's what everybody needs, but sometimes the ability to run through issues you're having, you might already know what the answer is, but you just want that person there to be able to bounce that thought, bounce that idea off.
Yeah.
And
well, I think that experience that you've just demonstrated and explained really helps perhaps resonate with organisations, because you can talk from experience. It's not talking about it from a theoretical or a textbook type approach. It's you've been through it, you've seen it, you've experienced it personally. So I'm sure that's really important moving forward.
But, and again, it's kind of, this might sound a little bit strange, but I kind of came into the role of the association to put something back. That was purely how I felt. I thought I'd been incredibly fortunate to work with some individuals that welcomed me into the business and gave me a career path that maybe if I'd been on my own journey, I wouldn't have arrived at so quickly. And being part of the association, you kind of see things that maybe need to be made to happen, but people don't necessarily want to share because they maybe they think it will damage their business, but if they let too much out. Whereas my view set was actually, if we can kind of pull the standards up, I'm not saying drag the standards, bring the standards up, make it a more level playing field, and then we're not buying on price and we're not having this huge rush to the bottom. We come back to people by people. I like the ethos. I like how your business works. I like what you do. And I'm prepared to pay a little bit more to have that relationship. Maybe that's an old-fashioned view, but it's kind of how I've always tried to work with people.
Okay. So just tell me, I mean, we're naturally talking about it, but tell me a little bit more detail about the ISA, what it does, what it represents, what its strategy is for short and medium and longer term. So I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, it's a trade association, and we were originally the British Sign Association, and then we became the British Sign and Graphic Association, and again that was to cover the element of vinyls and the various bits and pieces that go alongside, and a degree of print. And then about 4.5 years ago, we partnered with the ISA, which is an American trade association. And at the time, they were running the largest, shall we say, sign show in the States. So predominantly, their income stream was driven by the trade shows that they were running. And they had an infrastructure behind them, educational sets, online learning that we thought would be beneficial to our members. So we aligned ourselves with them, and we have a good relationship and work with them. With products like this show coming up, our president, who's literally just finished her 2-year term, is exhibiting there and actually doing some sessions. A lady called Sam Armstrong from Make It Happen, and so those sessions that she's doing in the UK, the sustainable boot camps, the learning opportunities she's doing with SignFab, seems to be actually something that the trade in the States would like to pick up. Now, the synergy between our businesses is quite similar. They have a lot of businesses. They use I often hear the term mum and pup sign shops. All that really means is actually family-run businesses. And I think our industry has had a bit of a change over the last decade and a half, where we've gone from really big players to a lot of smaller sign companies. And so, I think the Americans were already in that format. So the part of the reason where we are where I was, we're trying to represent the industry. So if I said best practice, we work with British standards, so the BSI, and we've actually helped them with 559 to put together the standards for the maintenance and the structure that signs should be manufactured to. So, but we're trying to make them realistic standards so that we don't have to adopt, maybe, I'm not saying European standards are wrong, but maybe some of the electrical wiring standards will be different to our own. So we want to be, if I say we want to be in control of our own destiny, that's probably a fairer statement. But we've then worked with the colleges to actually create the current apprenticeship scheme. So again, we've put the syllabus together, And again, our committees have come together to work with them to make the suggestion of what those should actually be. So we also monitor parish and regional councils for planning legislation, because again, the councils can adapt and interpret the planning legislation as they see fit. So if we think that they've misinterpreted, we'll actually challenge those things. We're not always successful, but we are there as a, hold on, this isn't the way that we're interpreting it, and we can go back to them. So I'd like to think we're there to try and help the industry. I don't think we often get recognised for what we do, and I would say that we represent around 300 members in total. Now, there's quite a lot. If I said that some of the bigger members in the sign fraternity, but I think the industry can become a bit blasé because they think, oh, you're taking care of it, we don't need to worry about it. I'm trying to spin it back around and just go, well, let's make it a community. Let's listen to what you want, but you need to contribute as well. We're there as a conduit. I can point someone in the right direction. Someone has an issue with a supplier, I can probably act as a buffer, come at it from a slightly more empathetic view because I'm not directly impacted. We've worked with specifiers where signs have either gone wrong or they don't feel that what they've got is what they were quoted for, and we've actually had independent people go in and assess the work. And we've come down on both sides. We said, well, you've got exactly what you asked for. That's exactly what the specification was. And we've come down to say we actually don't think that actually meets the criteria. So I'd like to think that we're there as a service provider to. I'm not. Police the industry sounds too strong. We're there. If the industry's healthy, we're healthy. The sector's healthy. Yeah. And in simplistic terms, that's where I'd like it to be.
Good. And I absolutely, from my own perspective and indeed my own experience, I absolutely endorse the value of independent industry associations like yours. I mean, I personally sit on the IPIA Council and do a lot of work with them. So I see the value of what independent associations do in terms of providing those guidelines and support for an industry that is going through and will continue to go through a massive transition. So moving on and maybe touching on, some of the trends and some of the things that you've noticed and experienced during the show last week. Do you want to maybe just comment on what you saw as being big trends or differences or things to look out for and note for the future?
It was really tricky because 2022 obviously we had a 2.5 year, almost 3 year gap because of COVID. So 2022 was kind of the launch again of the Sign Show, and so we were asked to host this Explains Lounge, and it really was an opportunity for people to kind of talk about what we felt were the hot topics. It was obviously received really well. So this year, the organisers did exactly the same thing, but gave us a bigger stand, and we ended up having panel sessions. But the downside is actually I ended up spending, I would say, 95% of my time on the stand for the 3 days. So I didn't really get my opportunity to do the show walk. I did it first thing in the morning before there was staff on, so I could see the stands, and then almost the last thing at night as things were closing. But because we included the people who were exhibiting in the panels, I think I probably got more of an overview of how they felt things actually were. Because the show itself, I don't want to say disappointing, it was smaller than I expected it to be, and that was the comment that I got back. I think flipping that around, because it's smaller, I think that it was more opportunity to spend time and talk with the suppliers about why they were there, what they were doing, the things they were seeing that were happening. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting, there seemed to be, yes, there was a drive again for things that save time. For the digital printing, the ability for the software to interpret other software and to stack. Now, obviously, in the print sector, that's always been a common theme. In the sign sector, well, we need a short run. We won't really want to read too much about that. And if there's a bit of wasted material, well, it isn't the end of the world. There seemed to be a focus on let's create things that kind of link. So the application tables to save time, registration points for actually things that we're cutting. Now, they've been around for a long time, but there seemed to be the ability for machines to work together. Again, that sounds almost too flippant a statement, but it seemed that the suppliers were much happier to work together and acknowledge that their machine didn't do maybe everything that they wanted. So maybe the platform meant that you had 3 or 4 different brands to work together. Now, I haven't really seen that before, because actually if you went for Epson, we went for HP, or we went from a Mackie, that was the total focus. That's that we want you to take all of that equipment. Whereas actually there seemed to be much more openness about how people would work together and what happens when you are using various supply chains and corporations. I thought that was a really interesting take. That thing about sharing that we mentioned earlier on, I don't know, because of COVID has made people a little bit more open about where their business are going and how they want to save time. But the other thing I thought was interesting is actually these were labour saving devices that people were highlighting, because there is this should we say, we're starting to notice gaps in the skill set. We're losing youngsters coming in, or the youngsters aren't coming because they're not interested, or the guys who are now coming to the end of their career don't want to take some of the qualifications to allow them to be on site, the CSCS cards. They don't want to take NVQs or the apprenticeships to get the cards. They prefer just to kind of slip off into the distance. So there was an upside to it, and there was a downside, because it highlighted issues as well.
It's interesting you mentioned those points, because I see those as being it's stuff that's happening elsewhere. So the skills shortage, the lack of young, new, innovative talent coming in is something that's prevalent throughout our industry, and commercial as well as packaging and beyond. So it's interesting that you see that as being a challenge as well. But also, and again, it resonates with what I'm seeing elsewhere in terms of the drive for automation, to make product, to make solutions, to make an end-to-end process that ultimately, is going to impact supply chain, to make it more seamless and to make it more integrated. And it may be that you're not integrating with one vendor any longer. It may be that it's multiple vendors that come together and integrate the best-in-class solutions. And we're seeing that throughout. So it's interesting that you saw that last week as well.
And I think I know I've mentioned this to other people. Our industry is very good at adopting materials, adopting machinery to fill a niche, and I think that's because we very rarely do large runs of anything. A lot of what we do and we design is for maybe half a dozen shops, maybe someone's got half a dozen vehicles, but they're actually relatively short and punchy delivery timescales. So the necessity for those things to all line up hasn't really been driven by it saves an awful amount of time. So I think that the supply chain has recognised we haven't done that, and they've adopted or adapted their systems to suit our short run products.
Yeah.
So they're having a little bit of a challenge to make people accept that they need to save labour time. But as we said, the fact is that maybe people are struggling to get staff, and people through COVID have left to do other things. And maybe the fact they haven't wanted to come back because they've recognised maybe the industry doesn't pay quite as well as we think we do. They're all things that should be open for discussion. And as a trade association, we become the conduit we're not the solution, but we can be the conduit to get the discussions going. I posted something last night on LinkedIn. I don't know, again, if people follow many people on LinkedIn, but just to ask the question. One of the things that came up in the discussions lounge, and again, it was completely off topic, was they brought an older gentleman in who was working with a reasonably senior manager at a sign company, and he was acting as a mentor to the existing staff, not new staff, but he was sharing his business practices, how he put things together through his kind of 40-50 years in the trade. And they were just saying, why don't we do this more often? Well, we haven't got the vehicle to make it happen, but we could if we all kind of came together. But what I don't want to happen is actually, well, okay, you take care of it and I'll jump on it when it's done. I want us to kind of, if we're going to adopt it, let's do it as a group, not as an individual. And then
absolutely.
We'll how serious it is.
And coincidentally, it's something that I've been personally involved in with IPA in looking to put together a mentoring program. So it's really interesting that you've identified that as being not a solution, but a potential opportunity to try and help attract younger people in and give them the experience and the training and the confidence to want to continue. So no, I think it's something that we need to look more into and try and formalise it a little bit better.
And that's one of the other things I'd really love to say. The fact that you're already going through, so you're ahead of us in the curve, if you like. And one of the things I found really strange when I stepped in as CEO, because the only reason I stepped in as CEO is because our MD at the time retired partway through COVID, thought that was an opportunity. You know, it was of an age. I'm now going to step aside. So I stepped in as a temporary role, and I've kind of ended up still being here. And that's another story. But I have tried to get a lot.
You're obviously doing something right there.
I'm talking the talk. It's actually, we've got to get the delivery yet, but it's. I found it quite strange initially when I approached other trade associations to ask how they were finding the, what's going on with your sector. Initially, it was, well, why are you talking to us? But quite quickly, it's changed to, yeah, quite happy to have a discussion. Are there any resources we might share? And there are things that have happened recently that have actually brought more of the association together. So I think that's really encouraging that we're starting to share, and I'll use the phrase best practice, because a lot of what we do isn't unique, and it helps the sector and it helps the adjoining sector. It's beneficial for all of us. So if we can find those portals that work, GPMA, obviously we've spoken before, is a prime example where sectors have come together for the benefit of the bigger the bigger picture. And there's a lot to be learned there, I think. We shouldn't be kind of keeping a light under the bush. We should just be helping each other.
I agree, absolutely agree. So just moving on, as you're probably aware, Ricoh have fairly recently entered into the market with innovation and development and launch of technology across all different types of applications. And we've seen some good success in a relatively short space of time. And many of our existing customers have adopted the technology, which enables them to extend the products and solutions and applications they can sell to their customers. What advice would you give to our customers and potentially future customers in terms of opportunities for the future based on application and maybe some of the things you've mentioned around supply chain? Where do you think the focus should be in the future?
I think that, again, this thing about collaboration, there needs to be more of it. And when I say that, you think of if I'm not going to name names, but you think of people who are developing machinery and not just developing it because they think it's what we need. They're developing it because they've seen a gap in the marketplace. So they'll probably create a white paper to justify the expense. They probably know where the print is actually going to go. I don't think that ever comes down the supply chain. It certainly doesn't come down to the smaller business owner. So they're making judgment calls on how they develop their business, on how nice a piece of kit looks at the show, not on where they can actually use it. So I'd love to see more. If I say I'd say white papers, but I'm thinking case studies. Let me know if I'm going down soft signage route. Who's going to use soft signage? Who could I tell to? What materials would I be using? What's the, what staff would I need to actually make that happen? So make it more of a relationship. I think we're getting there, but it still seems to be, well, yeah, this printer does 300 square meters, this one does 250, and that's what I'm buying it on. Well, actually, I'll probably never get to the capacity of 300 meters, an hour in my business running one-offs, but I would like to know where I'm selling into this sector. Where else can I say, help me develop my business, help me so create that relationship. And I know you can't do it directly down to one-to-one, but you can do it down to group set, and actually find the portals that actually allow you to share that information with people. And I'd love as a trade association to have that, manufacturers coming to me to tell me where they think the next trend will actually be, why they've invested in this particular print technology, because it starts discussion. And actually, if that discussion is actually headed by I'll say HP or it's by Epson or what happens to it, then probably the person reading will go and ask them first. So there's a benefit for the manufacturer to give us the information as well. And I hope I'm not being too simplistic on this, but it really frustrates me that we come up to making a judgment call just based on that machine's grey and that machine's white, and it does 10 meters faster than that machine.
Well, I think our philosophy is, there's a lot of vendors selling very good technology, and if you're comparing technologies to make an investment decision, perhaps that's not the right approach. It's what's the overall value in partnering with that vendor that's ultimately going to enable you to achieve your desired business outcomes. That should be fundamental to your investment choice, and that's the sort of approach that we take. So we developed a program called Edge, which is a support program which helps customers adopting our technology through a series of formal programs, marketing, business development programs, to help them to understand how they can market, position, and sell themselves differently into an environment that they've not had any previous experience in. So that's something that Ricoh has done as part of an emergence into this space and its commitment to want to be even more successful in this space.
Yeah, and that's great to hear. But it's also, I mean, you've got 4,000 potential sign companies, depending whose database you read. If you talk to the magazines, there's close to 8,000 sign businesses. You talk to the supply chain, they say there's 4,000. So let's go somewhere between. A lot of those guys don't have the time or don't feel they have the time. So we've just got to look at what the delivery systems are to actually define them. So again, things like these podcasts, who do they reach? Who's listening to them? We've got to have a number of avenues to explore to get that information out to people. And I think we're getting there, but we've still got, we as an industry, and I'm talking about the sign industry, have a way to go to make that really beneficial, again, for you guys as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And just sort of finally to wrap up this session, Craig, if you look to the future, with the experience that you've gained along the way and some of the things that you've spoken about in today's podcast and some of the things that you noted last week at Sign and Digital, what would you say would be the 3 key areas of interest that companies should look out for over the next and coming years?
Well, one of the ones that obviously we touched on earlier was actually, how do businesses actually achieve additional revenue streams, maybe from their key business? And when I say additional revenue streams, are they using the kit that they've actually invested in just for maybe they had a job that they were looking to do and that was why they bought the kit? What else can they do with their machine? So if I say, are they rinsing what they have to the nth degree? If they actually are doing that, that should then allow them to create the relationships that we talked about again earlier to where's the next stepping stone. So inks improve, longevity improves. Is that what the client wants? And then I suppose the third thing is actually the good old customer service. Why is a customer buying from me over somebody else? Well, if it is just price, then that's the wrong relationship from the outset. So I'll come back to one of the things that really came down hard or hit me in the face several times is the training element. So many people actually at the show, I run a business, but I don't know the next stage. So we'll actually find someone who does, allow them to actually develop you and your business, whether that be the supplier or whether that be a coach, someone to help you take those next steps. And it's not a guess then, it's actually that you've made a decision based on facts.
Okay, really interesting. And I'd like to just thank you, Craig, for your time, your input, and the feedback to the questions I've asked during today's podcast. I found it personally really interesting. It's given a real insight and a much better feel for where we are today and potentially what's going to happen in the future. And from my perspective, a lot of the things that you said resonates with what's happening in other areas of our industry as well, the broader print and graphic arts industry, in terms of automation, in terms of taking customers on a journey, being customer focused and led, and being focused not just on what you're producing, but what impact that product is going to have on the customers and the end users' business objectives. I think that is absolutely key and critical for the way we think, the way we operate, and the way that we need to transition in terms of a business for the future. So yeah, really interested and really thankful for your time and your feedback today, Craig. So I hope you've enjoyed today's podcast, which forms the ever-growing series and episodes within our Anything in Print podcast series. And with that, I'll sign off. So thank you very much. And thanks again, Craig.
Thanks very much.
Ricoh.